I never thought my fairy tale marriage would end with my husband trying to kill me. My name is Marcia Williams, and at 32 years old, I believed I had everything: a successful interior design career, a beautiful home in Chicago, and a husband who I thought loved me more than anything. But that day, when I caught Richard with another woman in our bed, I couldn't have imagined how my world would shatter. Not just with a broken heart, but with a broken leg, and the horrifying realization that the man I married had been plotting my death all along. If you've ever experienced betrayal, I hope my story helps you realize you're not alone. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it. Trust me, what happens next will change how you see relationships forever. Richard and I met at a charity gala 5 years ago. I was designing the event space as a favor to a client, and he was there representing his investment firm. The moment our eyes met across the crowded ballroom, something just clicked. He was tall, confident, with salt and pepper hair that made him look distinguished despite only being 36. His smile lit up his entire face when he approached me, champagne flute in hand. "That chandelier arrangement was your idea, wasn't it?" he asked, pointing to the ceiling where I'd designed a cascading display of lights that mimicked a waterfall. "It's the perfect centerpiece for the room." I was impressed he'd noticed such a specific detail. Most people just saw the overall effect without appreciating the individual elements. We talked for hours that night, and by the end of the evening we'd exchanged numbers. Our courtship was a whirlwind of fancy dinners, weekend getaways, and long conversations that lasted until dawn. Richard was attentive in ways no man had ever been before. He remembered the names of all my clients, sent flowers to my office for no reason at all, and always seemed genuinely interested in my day. 6 months after we met, Richard proposed during a private helicopter tour over Chicago at sunset. The ring was a 3-carat diamond that caught every ray of light. I cried as I said yes, and the pilot popped champagne for us as we circled back toward the city. Our wedding was everything I dreamed of as a little girl. We married at the Botanical Gardens with 200 guests in attendance. My father Frank walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. My mother Elaine had helped me into my dress that morning, telling me how proud she was of the woman I'd become. My brother James gave a heartfelt speech at the reception that had everyone reaching for their napkins to dab at their eyes. The first 3 years of our marriage were blissful. We traveled extensively. Paris for our first anniversary, a month-long tour of Southeast Asia for our second, and a Caribbean cruise for our third. My design business flourished with Richard's support and connections. He seemed so proud of my accomplishments, always bragging about my latest projects to his colleagues and friends. But somewhere during our 4th year together, things began to change in subtle ways. Richard started coming home later, claiming big projects at work needed his attention. Our weekend brunches became less frequent as he began scheduling golf games with clients. Even our physical intimacy changed. He was less affectionate, less present. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd smile that charming smile and say, "Just stressed about work, babe. The market's been unpredictable." And I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the understanding, supportive wife. I noticed he'd changed the password on his phone. Before, we'd known each other's passwords as a matter of convenience. When I asked about it casually over dinner, he said the company had implemented new security protocols. Everyone had to change their passwords monthly now. "Corporate security," he'd said with an eye roll. "Such a pain, but what can you do?" I doubled my efforts to be the perfect wife. I learned to cook his favorite meals, even taking classes to master difficult dishes. I redecorated our home office to make it more comfortable for him. I scheduled my client meetings around his calendar so I could be home when he was. Looking back, I see how I was trying to fix a problem I couldn't even name. For my 32nd birthday, Richard surprised me with diamond earrings that perfectly matched my engagement ring. They must have cost a fortune. That night, after too much wine, we made love for the first time in weeks, and I felt connected to him again. I tucked away my doubts, convincing myself I was being paranoid. But then came the text message. I was using Richard's phone to call a restaurant for a reservation because my phone had died. A notification popped up from someone named AP. The message simply read, "Can't wait for tomorrow. Same time, same place." When I asked Richard about it, he didn't even flinch. Amanda Parker. She's a new financial analyst on my team. We're meeting with clients from Singapore tomorrow. He showed me his calendar, and sure enough, there was a meeting scheduled with Singapore investors. I felt ashamed for doubting him. The night before our 5th anniversary, Richard announced he'd been offered a promotion. Chief Investment Officer for the entire Midwest region. It would mean more money, more prestige, but also more responsibility. We celebrated with an expensive bottle of wine, and he promised that once he settled into the new role, we'd take a second honeymoon, maybe to the Maldives or New Zealand. "I know I've been distant lately," he admitted, taking my hand across the dinner table. "But this promotion will be good for us, Marcia. I'll be able to delegate more, have more control over my schedule." I went to bed that night feeling hopeful, excited for our anniversary dinner the next day. I had reservations at Alinea, the best restaurant in Chicago, and had bought Richard a vintage watch he'd been eyeing for months. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, I would discover that everything about our marriage had been built on lies. I decided to come home early on our anniversary to prepare a special surprise before our dinner reservation. Richard thought I was meeting with a client in the suburbs until 5, but I'd wrapped up the consultation early, eager to get home. I stopped at the florist to pick up roses for the bedroom and a bottle of Richard's favorite whiskey from the liquor store. When I turned onto our street, I immediately noticed a sleek black Audi parked in our driveway next to Richard's Tesla. It seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. Richard hadn't mentioned having visitors or meetings at the house. Maybe it was a surprise, a delivery of some kind for our anniversary. I pulled my car around to park on the street, not wanting to block the driveway in case the visitor needed to leave. As I gathered my bags and the flowers, I felt an odd sensation in my stomach, like knowing the answer to a question before it's asked. Something didn't feel right. Our house was quiet when I entered through the front door. Too quiet for someone having a business meeting. I called out, "Richard, I'm home early." No response. I placed my bags on the kitchen counter and noticed 2 wine glasses in the sink. One had a distinct smudge of red lipstick on the rim. I don't wear red lipstick. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my ears. I slipped off my heels to move quietly across the hardwood floors. That's when I heard it. Laughter, a woman's voice coming from upstairs. Our bedroom. The staircase in our home is a floating design, each step seeming to hover in the air. As I climbed each one, I felt like I was floating too disconnected from my body, moving on autopilot. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. A sliver of light spilled into the hallway along with sounds that confirmed my worst fears. I pushed the door open slowly and time seemed to stop. There in our bed, the bed where we'd spent countless nights together, was Richard with a woman I recognized immediately. Amanda Parker, his financial analyst. She was straddling him, her red lipstick smeared across her face, her blonde hair falling around her shoulders. They didn't notice me at first. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to speak, unable to move. A strangled sound escaped my throat, something between a gasp and a scream. That's when they saw me. Amanda scrambled off Richard, grabbing at the sheets to cover herself. Richard's face went from shock to anger to calculated concern in the span of seconds. "Marcia," he exclaimed as if I was the one who shouldn't be there. "You're supposed to be with clients." "In our bed, Richard." My voice didn't sound like my own. It was high-pitched trembling. "On our anniversary." Amanda was frantically gathering her clothes from the floor, muttering apologies or excuses, I couldn't tell which. Richard stood up, pulling on his boxers, approaching me with his hands out like he was trying to calm a frightened animal. "Baby, this isn't what it looks like," he said, the most cliché line in the history of affairs. "Don't you dare," I spat. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence on top of everything else." Amanda tried to slip past me, still half-dressed, clutching her blouse to her chest. Without thinking, I slapped her across the face hard enough that she stumbled back. You knew he was married. You've been to our home for dinner parties. What happened next is still a blur of motion and pain. Richard grabbed my arm, spinning me around with such force that I lost my balance. "Don't touch her," he yelled, his face contorted with rage. I'd never seen him look that way before, like he didn't even know me, like I was nothing to him. I yanked my arm free and shoved him back. "Get out of my house. Both of you get out." Richard's expression changed again, a cold calculation replacing the anger. He stepped toward me, backing me toward the doorway. "Your house. I paid for this house. Every square inch of it." I kept backing up, suddenly afraid of the stranger before me. "We're done, Richard. I want a divorce." It happened so fast. He lunged forward, both hands on my shoulders, and pushed. I felt myself falling backward, my arms flailing for something to grab onto. There was nothing, just air. Then the sharp edge of the stairs against my back. Then tumbling the world spinning around me until I landed with a sickening crack on the hardwood floor at the bottom. The pain was instantaneous and blinding. I screamed as it shot through my right leg, radiating up through my hip. I knew immediately something was broken. I could see the unnatural angle of my leg, even through my tears. Richard and Amanda rushed down the stairs, both partially dressed now. Amanda looked terrified, her hand over her mouth. Richard knelt beside me, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh my God. Marcia, why did you fall? What were you thinking?" he said loudly, clearly for Amanda's benefit. "We need to get you to a hospital." Through the haze of pain, I could hear them arguing in hushed tones. "We need to call an ambulance," Amanda insisted. "No," Richard hissed. "No ambulance. I'll take her myself." "Richard, look at her leg. This is serious." I said I'll handle it. They thought I was too consumed by pain to understand what was happening, but their argument about calling for help cleared the fog in my mind. This wasn't an accident. Richard had pushed me deliberately, and now he was trying to control the narrative. While they argued, I slowly, painfully reached for my phone that had fallen out of my pocket during the fall. With trembling fingers, I texted my father. "Dad, emergency." Richard pushed me downstairs. "Hurt bad. Come to house now. Bring James." Then I called 911, keeping the phone close to my body so they wouldn't notice. When the dispatcher answered, I said as loudly as I could through gritted teeth, "Help me, please. I've fallen down the stairs. My husband pushed me. I think my leg is broken. I need an ambulance at 1742 Lakewood Drive." Richard whipped around, his eyes wide with fury when he realized what I'd done. He tried to grab the phone, but I held tight, screaming louder so the dispatcher could hear. "He's trying to take my phone. Please hurry." In that moment, looking up at Richard's face twisted with rage and panic, I realized I'd never really known him at all. The man I married, the man I loved, was a carefully constructed fiction. And now that the mask had slipped, I was seeing the truth for the first time. As Amanda backed away toward the door, clearly wanting no part of what was happening, and Richard stood over me with clenched fists, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever happened next, I would survive this. And Richard would pay for every lie, every betrayal, and for the pain shooting through my broken body. My father, Frank Johnson, arrived at our house before the ambulance. At 62, he still moved with the purpose and authority of the police officer he'd been for 30 years before retirement. His silver hair was disheveled, and he was wearing a Chicago Bears sweatshirt and jeans, having clearly dropped everything to come to my aid. Behind him was my brother James, his lawyer face already on grim and determined. When Dad saw me on the floor, my leg at an unnatural angle, his face went from concern to cold fury in an instant. Richard was still hovering nearby, keeping up the pretense of the concerned husband. "She fell down the stairs," Richard explained quickly. "I was just about to take her to the hospital." My father didn't even look at him. He knelt beside me, his weathered hand gently pushing hair from my face. "Marcia, baby girl, what happened? Tell me the truth." Through tears and gasping breaths, I told him, "Dad, he pushed me. I caught him with another woman, and when I confronted them, he pushed me down the stairs. My father stood slowly, turning to face Richard with the same expression I'd seen him wear when confronting criminals during his police days. Richard took a step back, suddenly seeming smaller. "You put your hands on my daughter." Dad's voice was terrifyingly quiet. James moved to stand between them, ever the mediator. "Frank, let's focus on Marcia right now. The police are on their way." Amanda had been inching toward the front door, her blouse buttoned incorrectly in her haste. Dad noticed her movement and pointed a finger at her without taking his eyes off Richard. "You. Don't move. You're a witness to what happened here." She froze, her face pale, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Richard's composed facade began to crack. "This is ridiculous. It was an accident. Tell them, Amanda. Tell them Marcia was hysterical and fell." Amanda looked from Richard to me, to my father and brother, indecision clear on her face. I didn't actually see what happened. I was getting dressed in the bedroom. The police arrived first, 2 officers who seemed to know my father. Then the paramedics, who immediately began assessing my injury. The pain was excruciating as they stabilized my leg, but the medication they administered began to take the edge off. As they loaded me onto the stretcher, a plainclothes detective arrived. He introduced himself as Detective Wilson, a tall man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Dad immediately pulled him aside, speaking in low tones, gesturing toward Richard and then to me. Richard was giving his version of events to one of the officers, his voice smooth and reasonable. "Officer, I understand how this looks, but my wife was understandably upset when she came home early and found me with another woman. She was yelling, not watching where she was going, and she stumbled on the stairs. It was a terrible accident, but that's all it was." I called out from the stretcher as they were about to wheel me out. "He's lying. Detective, please." He pushed me deliberately. "Check the angle of the fall. Check for bruises on my shoulders where he shoved me." Detective Wilson approached the stretcher, notepad in hand. "Ms. Williams will investigate thoroughly. I promise you that. Right now you need to get to the hospital. I'll come speak with you there." As they loaded me into the ambulance, I saw my father talking intensely with James. Dad looked like he wanted to tear Richard apart with his bare hands. James had a restraining hand on his arm. The last thing I saw before the ambulance doors closed was Amanda being escorted to a police cruiser for questioning, and Richard standing in the doorway of our home, watching everything with calculating eyes. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the doctors confirmed what I already knew. My right tibia and fibula were broken in multiple places. The X-rays showed a complex fracture that would require surgery and the insertion of metal pins. The orthopedic surgeon explained that I'd need months of recovery and physical therapy. What he didn't need to explain was that my life had just been irrevocably altered. Detective Wilson came to see me before surgery, his notebook open, recorder running. I told him everything, starting with the changes in Richard's behavior over the past year, the password changes, the late nights, finding him with Amanda, the argument, and finally the deliberate push that sent me tumbling down our stairs. "Ms. Williams, I have to ask, had there been any previous incidents of violence in your marriage?" Detective Wilson asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "No," I answered, then hesitated. "At least nothing physical. But looking back, there were moments, times when he'd get so angry over small things. He'd never touch me, but he'd throw things, punch walls. I always attributed it to work stress." The detective nodded, making notes. "We're going to interview your husband and Ms. Parker separately. The officers noted some inconsistencies in their initial statements." He paused, looking up from his notepad. "Your father mentioned he's a retired police officer." "Yes, he was a detective with Chicago PD for 30 years. Violent Crimes Division." Detective Wilson smiled slightly. "I thought the name sounded familiar. Frank Johnson was something of a legend in the department. He trained some of our best detectives." As he was leaving, Detective Wilson turned back to me. "Ms. Williams, I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously. Domestic violence cases are a priority for our department. We'll be thorough in our investigation." The nurse came in shortly after explaining they needed to prep me for surgery. As the anesthesia began to take effect, I remembered thinking that when I woke up, nothing would ever be the same again. My marriage, my home, my sense of safety and trust all shattered like the bones in my leg. I was right. When I woke up hours later groggy and in pain despite the medication, my parents were sitting beside my hospital bed. Mom was holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. Dad was on the phone, his voice a harsh whisper. I caught fragments of his conversation. "Listen, Mike, I know it's been years since we worked together, but I'm calling in every favor you owe me." This bastard pushed my daughter down a flight of stairs. "Yeah, domestic violence, attempted murder as far as I'm concerned. I need your best people on this. No, I don't trust that he won't try again." In that moment, despite the pain and the uncertainty of what lay ahead, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't alone in this fight. And my father, who had spent his career pursuing justice for victims, would make sure Richard didn't get away with what he'd done. The weeks following my surgery were a blur of pain medication, uncomfortable hospital beds, and finally the move to my parents' home in Evanston. My childhood bedroom became my recovery room with a hospital bed rented to accommodate my elevated leg and the various medical equipment monitoring my healing. My mother, a retired nurse, kept track of my medication schedule with military precision. My father alternated between tenderly caring for me and disappearing for hours to make phone calls to his old contacts in the police department. James visited daily, bringing case files from his law firm to review while sitting beside my bed, a silent but comforting presence. Richard tried to contact me multiple times. He sent extravagant flower arrangements to the hospital and later to my parents' home, all of which my father promptly threw in the trash. His text messages ranged from apologetic to accusatory, "I'm so sorry about what happened," followed by, "If you hadn't overreacted, none of this would have happened." When the flowers and texts didn't work, he showed up at my parents' house. Dad answered the door, closing it behind him to speak to Richard on the porch. I couldn't hear what was said, but when Dad came back inside, his knuckles were red, and he simply said, "He won't be coming back." I didn't ask for details. I hired Jennifer Ramirez, a divorce attorney recommended by James. She was sharp, efficient, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting her clients. At our first meeting in my parents' living room, she laid out the realities of my situation. "Marcia, we're not just dealing with a divorce here. We're dealing with a criminal case running parallel to the divorce proceedings. The good news is criminal charges of domestic violence will significantly strengthen our position in the divorce. The bad news is Richard has already hired Steinman and Associates." Steinman and Associates was one of the most expensive divorce firms in Chicago, known for representing wealthy clients and playing hardball. I wasn't surprised Richard had gone straight to them. He always believed money could fix any problem. "I've filed an emergency order of protection," Jennifer continued, "which has been granted based on the police report and your medical records. Richard cannot legally come within 500 feet of you, your parents' home, or your office." The first real bombshell came when Detective Wilson visited me a week after my surgery. He sat in the armchair beside my bed, his notepad open as usual. "We've been investigating Mr. Williams and Ms. Parker," he began, "and we've discovered some concerning information. Based on their phone records, they've been having an affair for approximately 18 months. 18 months. A year and a half of my 5-year marriage had been a lie. I felt sick remembering all the nights I'd waited up for him, all the weekends I'd spent alone while he claimed to be working. All the times I'd defended him to friends and family when they commented on his absences. "There's more," Detective Wilson continued. "We found a series of text messages between them discussing what they called the problem." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "It seems they were referring to you, Ms. Williams." Before Detective Wilson could elaborate further, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop the charges or things will get worse for you. You have no idea what you're up against." I showed the message to Detective Wilson, who immediately took my phone to document the threat and began arrangements to trace the number. He advised me not to respond and to forward any additional messages directly to him. My physical recovery was agonizingly slow. Each day was a struggle between the pain in my leg and the emotional devastation of my shattered marriage. The physical therapist who came to the house 3 times a week was a former Army medic named Steve. He pushed me harder than I thought I could handle, but his no-nonsense approach kept me focused on the tangible goal of walking again rather than dwelling on Richard's betrayal. "Pain is just weakness leaving the body," Steve would say, as he guided me through excruciating exercises to rebuild muscle and flexibility. "I'm pretty sure pain is just pain." I'd grunt back, sweat beading on my forehead. But he was right in a way. Each painful step in my physical recovery seemed to mirror a step in my emotional recovery, learning to stand again literally and figuratively. About a month after the incident, my best friend Lisa came over with coffee and news. She'd gone to my house with Richard to pick up some of my clothes and personal items. Jennifer had arranged for a police escort to accompany her, ensuring Richard wouldn't be there. "The place looks different," Lisa said, setting a box of my belongings on the bed. "He's moved things around, replaced some of the furniture." It hurt to think of Richard erasing my presence from the home I'd designed with such care. Lisa must have seen the pain on my face because she quickly changed the subject, but not before slipping me a file folder. "I found these in the bottom drawer of his office desk," she whispered, even though we were alone in the room. "I don't know if they're important, but they seemed off." After Lisa left, I opened the folder. Inside were documents for a shell company called RW Investments and bank statements showing large transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. I immediately called Jennifer, who arranged for a forensic accountant to review the documents. It seemed my broken leg wasn't the only thing Richard had been hiding. As my physical strength slowly returned, I felt a new determination growing within me. Richard had tried to break more than my body. He'd tried to break my spirit, my confidence, my very sense of self. But with each painful step on my healing leg, with each new revelation about his deception, I became more resolved. I would not only survive this, I would emerge stronger. And I would make damn sure Richard faced consequences for what he'd done to me. As I began to regain mobility using a walker to move around my parents' house, the investigation into Richard's activities deepened. Jennifer's forensic accountant discovered that Richard had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into his private accounts for over a year. The last major transfer had been just 3 weeks before the incident. A sum of $250,000 moved offshore. "He was planning this," I said to Jennifer during one of our strategy sessions at the dining table. My leg was propped on a chair, still encased in a cast. "The timing can't be a coincidence." Jennifer nodded, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she reviewed the financial statements. "This works in our favor, Marcia. It shows premeditation and financial misconduct. We'll use this to go after a larger settlement." But money was the least of my concerns. The threatening text messages had continued coming from different numbers, each time making them harder to trace. "You should have just fallen and died," read one. "Accidents happen to people who don't mind their own business," said another. Detective Wilson took each message seriously, adding them to the growing file of evidence against Richard. The police had also been investigating Amanda Parker more closely. They'd obtained a warrant to search her apartment and found emails between her and Richard that painted a disturbing picture. "It's time to solve our problem permanently," Richard had written in one email dated just a month before our anniversary. "A has agreed to the terms. We'll proceed after the promotion is finalized." Lisa had been helping me access my old email accounts and cloud storage, looking for any evidence I might have overlooked. One evening, while going through a folder of photos from a company holiday party, she froze, pointing at the screen. "Marcia, look at this." It was a picture from Richard's company Christmas party the previous year. Richard stood in the center of a group, his arm around Amanda. But what caught my attention was the way they were looking at each other, the intimate familiarity in their posture. And on Amanda's wrist was a bracelet I recognized immediately, a distinctive piece from Tiffany that I'd found in Richard's briefcase months ago. When I'd asked about it, he'd claimed it was a gift for his mother's birthday. They weren't even trying to hide it, I whispered, feeling sick. They were flaunting their relationship right in front of everyone. As Lisa continued scrolling through photos, we found more evidence of their affair hidden in plain sight. Numerous work events where Amanda was present always positioned near Richard. In some photos, they were standing a respectable distance apart, but their body language told a different story. It was like discovering a parallel universe where my husband had been living a completely separate life. Meanwhile, my father had been conducting his own investigation with the help of former colleagues. Frank Johnson had never been one to sit idly by when someone he loved was in danger. One afternoon, he came into my room with a file folder, his expression grave. "Marcia, honey, I found something you need to see." Inside the folder was information about a company called Apex Holdings, a shell corporation that Richard had established 3 years into our marriage. But the most disturbing document was a life insurance policy Richard had taken out on me just 6 months earlier. $2 million with Richard as the sole beneficiary and a double indemnity clause for accidental death. He was planning to kill me, I said, my voice hollow with shock. The push down the stairs wasn't a momentary rage. It was attempted murder. Dad sat on the edge of my bed, taking my hand in his. "I've already given this to Detective Wilson. They're building a solid case, baby girl. Richard won't get away with this." That night I had the first of many panic attacks. The walls of my childhood bedroom seemed to close in on me as I gasped for breath, my heart racing, sweat drenching my nightgown. Mom heard me from down the hall and rushed in, her nursing instincts taking over as she talked me through breathing exercises, her cool hand on my forehead. "He tried to kill me, Mom," I sobbed when I could finally speak. "The man I slept next to for 5 years planned my death for money." Mom held me as I cried, rocking me as if I were still a child. "But he failed, Marcia. You're stronger than he knew. And now you're going to show him exactly who he's up against." The next day, Lisa brought news that added another layer to the nightmare. She'd been in contact with a woman named Stephanie Davis, who had reached out after seeing a news story about my case. "She says she's Richard's ex-wife," Lisa explained. "And Marcia, she claims Richard was abusive to her too. She wants to talk to you." I agreed to meet Stephanie at my parents' house with Lisa and my mother present. She arrived punctually, a slender woman in her mid-30s with careful movements and watchful eyes that reminded me of a deer ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "I never thought I'd have the courage to come forward," Stephanie began after we settled in the living room. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her teacup. "But when I saw your story on the news, I knew I had to speak up." Stephanie and Richard had been married for 3 years before he met me. Their divorce had been finalized just 6 months before our first meeting, a detail Richard had glossed over, telling me he'd been divorced for years. "The abuse started gradually," she explained. "First emotional, then financial control, then physical. It was always accidents. I fell in the shower. I tripped over the dog. I was clumsy on the stairs." She pulled up her sleeve to reveal a long scar on her forearm. "This was from being careless with a kitchen knife." "Did you ever report him?" Mom asked gently. Stephanie shook her head. "I was too afraid. And he paid me off. The divorce settlement included a non-disclosure agreement. I'm breaking that by talking to you now, but I don't care anymore. I can't let him hurt someone else." "Someone else?" I repeated. "You mean after me?" "Richard has a pattern," Stephanie said grimly. "Before me, there was a girlfriend who had a suspicious car accident. She survived, but dropped the investigation after receiving a large settlement. I only found out about her after we were married." As Stephanie continued sharing her experiences, a chilling picture emerged of Richard as a calculating predator who targeted women, manipulated them, and then attempted to profit from their injuries or deaths. The parallels between her experiences and mine were undeniable. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" I asked, anger rising in my chest. How does someone get away with this multiple times? Money, Stephanie said simply. Money charm and careful planning. He makes sure there's always just enough reasonable doubt. When Stephanie left, promising to speak with Detective Wilson and testify if needed, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my broken leg or broken marriage anymore. It was about stopping Richard before he could hurt someone else. And for the first time since the incident, I felt truly certain that I would not only survive this ordeal, but would emerge from it with purpose. The investigation gained momentum quickly after Stephanie Davis came forward. Detective Wilson used her testimony to secure additional warrants, and what the police found in Richard's office and personal storage unit was damning. A locked safe contained documents detailing multiple insurance policies on my life research, on untraceable poisons, and a step-by-step guide to making a death look accidental. We've arrested Mr. Williams and Ms. Parker. Detective Wilson informed me during a visit to my parents' home. I had progressed to using crutches by then, able to move more freely around the house. They're being charged with conspiracy to commit murder-assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and financial fraud. Relief flooded through me at the news, but it was short-lived. Richard and Amanda were both released on bail within hours, their expensive legal teams arguing successfully for their pre-trial freedom. The only consolation was that the conditions of Richard's bail included an ankle monitor and strict orders to stay away from me and my family. Jennifer warned me that the legal process would be lengthy and potentially traumatic. They'll try to paint you as unstable, jealous, and accident-prone. Richard's lawyers will argue that you attacked Amanda and then fell accidentally while in a rage. They'll try to discredit your character in any way possible. Let them try, I said, a new hardness in my voice that surprised even me. I have the truth on my side. And now I have Stephanie's testimony too. The press had gotten hold of the story, turning my personal tragedy into public entertainment. Finance executive and mistress charged in murder plot against wife, read the headline in the Chicago Tribune. Local news vans occasionally parked near my parents' house, hoping for a statement or a glimpse of the victim on crutches. Lisa helped me craft a single statement for the press, emphasizing my focus on healing and my faith in the justice system. After that, we refused all interview requests despite increasingly generous offers from national news magazines and talk shows. 3 months after the incident, with my physical therapy progressing well and my leg healing on schedule, Richard made his most brazen move yet. He showed up at my parents' house unannounced, violating his bail conditions. I was alone in the house, my parents having gone to the grocery store, when the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, I felt my blood freeze. Richard stood on the porch, dressed immaculately in a suit, as if he were arriving for a business meeting rather than breaking the law. I immediately called 911, then texted my father. Richard is here. Called police. Stay away until they come. Richard rang the bell again, then called out, Marcia, I know you're in there. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I didn't respond, just watched through the peephole as he paced on the porch. He looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes that his expensive suit couldn't disguise. Marcia. His voice grew louder, angrier. You're ruining both our lives with these ridiculous accusations. Just drop the charges and we can both move on. Still, I remained silent. My phone clutched in my hand, watching the minutes tick by as I waited for the police. Richard's facade of calm, businesslike demeanor cracked further. Do you think anyone's going to believe you? He shouted, banging on the door now. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I will destroy you in court. Every secret, every flaw, every mistake you've ever made will become public record. I heard sirens in the distance growing louder. Richard heard them too. He stopped banging and stepped back from the door, straightening his tie, composing himself. This isn't over, he said, his voice chillingly calm again. You should have just fallen and died, Marcia. It would have been easier for everyone. The same words from the anonymous text message. Confirmation, if I needed it, that Richard had been behind the threats all along. Police cruisers pulled up to the house, and officers approached Richard with hands on their weapons. I opened the door once they had him secured, explaining that he had violated the restraining order. They arrested him on the spot for violation of bail conditions. My father arrived just as they were putting Richard in the back of a police car. Dad's face was murderous as he stormed up to the vehicle. "You come near my daughter again, and restraining order or not, you'll regret it," he growled through the open window. One of the officers, a former colleague of my father's, gently pulled him back. "Not worth it, Frank. Let the system handle him." Richard just smiled that calculated smile from the back seat. "Your daughter isn't the innocent victim she's pretending to be, Mr. Johnson. You might want to ask her about the prescription painkillers she's been abusing since her surgery." It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but I could see the strategy taking shape. Richard would try to paint me as an unreliable drug addict whose accusations couldn't be trusted. It was exactly the type of character assassination Jennifer had warned me about. As the police car drove away with Richard inside, I stood on the porch leaning on my crutches and made myself a solemn promise. I would not let him intimidate me. I would not let him silence me. And most importantly, I would not let him hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me and Stephanie. The path ahead would be difficult, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and the ongoing challenge of physical and emotional recovery. But for the first time since my fall down those stairs, I felt truly certain that I would not just survive this ordeal, but I would emerge from it victorious. Richard had tried to break me, but he had only succeeded in revealing my true strength. The day of the trial arrived after months of depositions, evidence hearings, and legal maneuvering. The Cook County Courthouse was imposing its neoclassical architecture, a reminder of the weight and tradition of the law. I entered through a side door to avoid the press gathered on the steps, my lawyer Jennifer by my side, my father and brother following closely behind. My leg had healed remarkably well according to my doctors, though I still walked with a slight limp that might be permanent. The physical scars were fading, but the emotional ones remained raw. Coming face to face with Richard in the courtroom would be the greatest test of my recovery so far. "Remember," Jennifer whispered as we took our seats at the prosecution table, "just tell the truth. Your story is powerful because it's real." Richard and Amanda were being tried together, their lawyers having failed in their attempts to separate the cases. They sat at the defense table, both dressed conservatively, both avoiding looking in my direction. Richard whispered something to his attorney, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and a permanent smirk. The courtroom filled quickly. News of the case, a wealthy financial executive conspiring with his mistress to kill his wife, had captured public attention. Every available seat was taken mostly by press and curious onlookers. Stephanie Davis sat in the front row directly behind me, a silent show of solidarity. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, named Judge Harriet Coleman, entered the courtroom. Her reputation for fairness and intolerance of courtroom theatrics had preceded her. As the proceedings began, I felt a strange calm settle over me. After months of anxiety about this moment, now that it was here, I was ready. The prosecution presented their case methodically, laying out the evidence piece by piece. The life insurance policy, the offshore accounts, the emails and text messages between Richard and Amanda discussing the problem and accidents, the documented history of Richard's controlling behavior, financial manipulation, and the pattern established with Stephanie's testimony. Richard's attorney tried to paint me as emotionally unstable, suggesting that I had invented or exaggerated the assault after catching my husband in an affair. He implied that my family, particularly my father, had influenced the police investigation due to Frank's former position on the force, Ms. Williams. Richard's attorney asked during my cross-examination, his tone condescending, "Isn't it true that you've been taking strong prescription painkillers since your accident? Medications that can affect memory and perception." "I followed my doctor's prescribed treatment exactly," I replied steadily, "and I've been under regular medical supervision throughout my recovery. My memory of that day is crystal clear." When it came time for me to tell my story to the jury, I spoke clearly and directly, describing not just the assault itself, but the pattern of control and manipulation that had preceded it. I explained how Richard had isolated me from friends, controlled our finances, and gaslit me when I questioned his behavior. When I saw him with Amanda in our bed, I wasn't just hurt by the infidelity, I explained to the rapt jury. I was horrified by the realization that our entire marriage had been built on lies, that the man I trusted most in the world had been systematically deceiving me for years. I described the moment of the push in detail, the look in Richard's eyes, the deliberate nature of his actions, and the calculated way he and Amanda had delayed getting me medical help. Throughout my testimony, I didn't allow myself to look at Richard, focusing instead on the jury, on telling my truth as clearly as possible. When Amanda took the stand, her composure cracked under the prosecutor's questioning. She admitted that she and Richard had been involved for over 18 months, that he had promised to leave me numerous times, and that they had discussed how Richard would be better off financially if I were out of the picture. He said it would look like an accident, she testified, tears streaming down her face as she attempted to save herself by implicating Richard more deeply. The stairs were his idea. He said insurance wouldn't investigate an accidental fall. Richard's testimony was a masterclass in manipulation. He expressed appropriate remorse for the affair, but maintained that my fall had been a tragic accident resulting from my emotional state. He denied any plan to harm me, characterizing the emails and texts as dark humor and venting, rather than actual plotting. I loved my wife, he said, looking directly at the jury with what appeared to be genuine emotion. I made a terrible mistake with the affair, a mistake I will regret for the rest of my life, but I would never ever deliberately harm Marcia. His performance was convincing. I could see some jurors nodding slightly, perhaps seeing the charming, reasonable man I had once fallen in love with. The man who could make anyone believe anything he wanted them to believe. But then came the financial evidence. The forensic accountant meticulously detailed how Richard had systematically drained our accounts, established shell companies, and hidden assets offshore. The timing of these transactions, correlating exactly with the escalation of his affair with Amanda and the purchase of the life insurance policy, created a damning timeline that even the most skilled liar couldn't explain away. The most powerful moment came when the prosecution played the recording of my 911 call from the day of the assault. Hearing my own voice, filled with pain and fear, crying out that my husband had pushed me, brought back the reality of that day with visceral intensity. Several jurors visibly flinched at my screams, and one older woman on the jury wiped away tears. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict. On the count of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, we find the defendant Richard Williams guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant Richard Williams guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, we find the defendant Richard Williams guilty. Similar verdicts were read for Amanda, though she was acquitted of the assault charge since she hadn't physically pushed me. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement before sentencing, I stood slowly, my hand gripping the table for support. Your Honor, the physical injury I suffered at Richard's hands will heal with time. The broken bones have mended, but there are deeper wounds that may never fully heal, the wounds of betrayal and broken trust. Richard didn't just break my leg that day. He broke the future we had planned together, the life we had built. I paused, gathering my strength for what I needed to say next. But I am not standing before you today as a victim. I am a survivor. Richard's actions forced me to find a strength in myself that I never knew existed. While I ask the court to impose a sentence that reflects the severity of his crimes, I also want Richard to know that he failed in his ultimate goal. He didn't break me, and I will move forward with my life stronger for having survived his betrayal. Judge Coleman sentenced Richard to 18 years in prison for the combined charges. Amanda received 5 years with eligibility for parole after serving 2. Additionally, Richard was ordered to pay substantial restitution and all of my medical expenses. The divorce was finalized with a settlement that reflected Richard's financial misconduct. As Richard was led away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one last time. I met his gaze steadily without fear or anger. The power he had once held over me was gone. In its place was a new understanding of my own resilience and worth. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by my family and friends, I declined to speak with the press, except to make one brief statement. Today, justice was served not just for me, but for all survivors of domestic violence. No one should suffer in silence. No one should live in fear. And no one is alone in their fight for justice. It's been 2 years since the trial, and my life has transformed in ways I never could have imagined on that terrible day when I caught Richard with Amanda. Physical healing came first through months of determined effort with my physical therapist, Steve. The limp is barely noticeable now, though I still feel changes in the weather in the metal pins that hold my bones together. The emotional healing has been a longer, more complex journey. In the months following the trial, I struggled with anxiety, panic attacks, and a profound distrust of others. Simple things like dating or even forming new friendships seemed impossibly daunting. How could I ever trust my judgment again when I had been so completely deceived by the man I married? My therapist, Dr. Sawyer, helped me understand that Richard's deception wasn't a reflection of my failings, but of his pathology. "You weren't stupid to trust," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "He was exceptionally skilled at lying. That's not your fault." Gradually, I began to rebuild my life. I sold the house Richard and I had shared, unable to separate it from the memories of that day on the stairs. Instead, I bought a sunny loft in a renovated warehouse downtown, a space I designed myself, filling it with light and color and nothing that reminded me of my previous life. My interior design business not only survived but thrived. Clients who might have drifted away during my recovery stayed loyal, and new opportunities emerged. I hired 2 junior designers to help with the workload, expanding the business beyond what I could have managed alone. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from a woman named Heather. She had read about my case and recognized Richard's methods. He had dated her briefly before meeting Stephanie, and she had experienced the same pattern of control and accidents before managing to escape the relationship. She thanked me for being brave enough to take him to court, for putting him somewhere he couldn't hurt anyone else. Heather's letter was followed by others, women sharing their own stories of survival of relationships that had turned dangerous of escapes narrow and harrowing. Reading their words, I realized that my personal tragedy could serve a greater purpose. With encouragement from Lisa and financial backing from my brother James, I established the Solid Ground Foundation, a nonprofit organization providing resources, legal support, and temporary housing for survivors of domestic violence. We opened our first safe house a year ago, a secure location where women and their children can begin the process of rebuilding their lives free from fear. My father, ever my fiercest protector, volunteers as a security consultant for the foundation training staff on safety protocols and often driving women to court appointments himself. My mother offers nursing care and emotional support to residents, her gentle presence a balm for those still raw with trauma. The foundation has already helped dozens of women escape dangerous situations and begin new lives. Each success story heals something in me too, transforming my personal pain into purpose. When I speak at fundraisers or awareness events, sharing my experience publicly, despite the discomfort it sometimes still brings, I think of these women and find the strength to continue. Stephanie Davis has become both a friend and a colleague, joining the foundation as an outreach coordinator. Her understanding of the manipulation tactics used by abusers like Richard has been invaluable in developing our educational programs. Together, we've created workshops that help people identify warning signs of controlling relationships before they escalate to violence. As for Richard, he remains in prison, his appeals denied. I no longer waste energy hating him or fearing him. The power he once held over my life has been reclaimed, redirected toward helping others and healing myself. I've learned that surviving isn't just about making it through the immediate crisis. It's about what you build from the wreckage. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't diminished by someone else's attempt to destroy you. It's about turning pain into purpose and fear into fierce determination. If you're watching this and something in my story resonates with your own experience, please know that you are not alone. There are resources available, people who will believe you, and a future waiting that isn't defined by your past trauma. The first step is reaching out, breaking the silence that protects abusers and isolates survivors. My broken leg healed stronger at the point of fracture, the bone reinforced with metal that will remain part of me forever. In the same way, I've been transformed by what tried to break me. Not diminished, but strengthened. Not defined by victimhood, but by survival and the choice to help others find their own path to solid ground. If my story has touched you, please like and subscribe to support this channel. Share your own experiences in the comments if you feel comfortable. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is simply let others know they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the strongest people aren't those who never fall. They're the ones who get back up again and again until standing tall becomes second nature.